my name is Disha Ahluwalia. I'm an archaeologist and I write regular columns for ThePrint. In last couple of weeks, I've been discussing extensively in my columns and through my columns about the archaeology of River Ghaggar Basin, especially the early cultures. I started off by discussing about how archaeological sites were discovered along the dry bed of River Ghaggar-Hakra and how that had never started in about 1800s, and then eventually it was 1940s and 1950s which gave impetus to the archaeological research in the river basin. It was Orelstein who mapped out a lot of sites on the dry bed of the river. He spoke extensively about sites, antiquity of the sites, or whatever he could at that point of time. But one of the major contributors in the research was the extensive exploration work undertaken by Amalanda Ghosh and his entire team in 1950s. It was a time when India became an independent country, a newly formed India, and its archaeological survey of India was also revived, and A. Ghosh became the first Director General of the survey. And it was also the time when a lot of archaeological projects were funded by the government. It was also the time when projects like the excavation of Hastinapur was undertaken in the Ganga, on the banks of Ganga, and on the other side there were various other excavations being conducted simultaneously, and of course the Ghosh extensive exploration. Now the aim of this very exploration was to understand the antiquity of the river basin and antiquity of the settlements along the river. By antiquity I mean that how old was the settlement in this particular area, because when Orelstein did explore the region, he mentioned that there are no Chalcolithic, which are copper-age settlements in the area which is the Rajasthan's Sri Ganganagar district and Hanumangarh district. But when Ghosh and his team started exploring the region, within the first 2 days, they found about 20 odd Harappan affiliated settlements in that region. And eventually, many settlements were subjected to excavation in the years to follow. The first one, the early excavations, of course, was the one, the Kalibanga site, which was excavated by Bibilal and B.K. Thapar in 1960s, and then many other explorations were undertaken. Baror was excavated in early 2000s, and then the site of Tarkanwala Dera was also excavated along with Chak 86, and then in 2014 Binjor was excavated. All these sites I have discussed in separate columns, and you can check them out. But when we talk about these archaeological sites, and of course as I mentioned that Ghosh's aim was to understand the antiquity of settlements in this region. It is now evident after excavations and the dates that new dates have come up from sites like Birana, which falls in Haryana, and sites like recent excavations at Rakhigadi or at Kunal, at various other sites on this ferry river system. We know that the settlements were parallel to the ones at Indus, in Indus, and we know that the sites go as early as at least like Harappa, which is about 5,500 years. That is the Ravi phase, the early Harappan, the pre-Harappan phase, and the same goes for the Ghaggar-Hakra region as well. So we know that the settlement is at least old as 5,500 to 6,000 BCE, if not later. The question of antiquity is eventually, of course, there are a lot of debates, there are a lot of viewpoints which are presented by various archaeologists. There are a lot of things that need to be sort of discussed in archaeological circles about these various sites and dates. But one thing is clear, that we do have a strong Harappan presence in this region. In fact, majority of Harappan sites seems to be on the banks of Ghaggar-Hakra, and these settlements eventually were abandoned about 2000 BCE, and there are series of dates for this particular time frame. there's not one site, but there are series of sites, be it the site which is on Haryana, which is Rakhigarhi, or any other site, be it Banavali, be it the site which is right on the western edge of Indo-Pak border, Binjore, or Tarkhanwala Dera, or Baror. We know now that the Harappan settlements, at least especially in the region which is today the Anupgarh Tehsil, going towards from Suratgarh to Kalibangan, this very region, at least the sites were abandoned, and a lot of movement started, especially towards east, towards Haryana, going all the way to Yamuna region. So we know that the migration started sort of happen, and this is where the decline or the deurbanization of the civilization also began. A lot of emphasis of the deurbanization is been put on the river itself, because Harappan civilization is considered to be a riverine culture. Now, by riverine culture, I mean that the culture which is supported by the river, which helps in subsistence, that is in agriculture, fishing, in also in transportation, and various other things, where river is the main source which is aiding the culture, which has birthed the culture, and has helped the culture to flourish. Not to say that there are no seasonal rivers, or seasonal rivers can't do it. River in general is considered to be a suitable place for any culture to flourish, grow, and then the expansion sort of happens from there. What it meant in the case of Harappan civilization is that the rivers, the two rivers that are considered to be the important rivers and the major, the center of the entire Harappan civilization, the core of it is one side you have the Indus on the west, and then you have the Ghaggar-Hakra, which represents the larger Saraswati river system. These two major rivers are considered to be glacier fed. We know even today Indus is flowing in its full glory, and there are recurring floods also on Indus. And in fact, a couple of years ago, there was a massive flood which affected the settlements. One can imagine, the Indus's glory at one point of time, and of course, even Saraswati was glacial fed. Now, the decline, and especially the settlements in the region of Ghaggar-Hakra, because you have sites on the banks of Indus which do go well into the late Harappan phase. We have that at Harappa itself. There are sites in Gujarat which are on many non-perennial rivers, and also in Kutch, which do go into the late Harappan phase, the deurbanization phase. The sites, in the periphery, which are not on the bank of Ghaggar, they show the later Harappan phase. But the ones which are on the Ghaggar, the majority and one important sites, they don't show later Harappan phase at all. And then there is a migration that one notes, that archaeologists and scholars have noted for decades and decades. And the reason being that there was a time about 2000 BCE when Ghaggar, which was a glacier-fed river earlier, became a non-perennial river. That is, it became a monsoonal or seasonal river, and because it became a seasonal river, the subsistence pattern has changed, the landscape has altered, and also was triggered by aridity and climate change. At that point of time, 4.2 Ka is a global phenomenon. Now, various papers and research has come up. So, a lot of factors, not just the drying up. So, when you see drying up of the river Saraswati, the main reason for it was that the glaciers inflow, the water from the glacier to the channel had sort of stopped, and Ghaggar, which is this widespread river right from Adibadri going all the way to Rajasthan and then crossing the border, the present day border, it didn't exist back then, present day border going towards Cholistan, and then once at one point met somewhere near Dhoravira in Kutch. This entire track was fed by glaciers, and also by the two major contributors, that is Satluj and Yamuna. Satluj and Yamuna both had one point of time joined the Saraswati river system. So they are also were also migrated, Satluj towards west and Yamuna towards east, and then again the tectonic shifts and climatic changes and various other factors combined, when put together, led to the abandonment of settlements on in this region by 2000 BC. So this is basically what the whole story has been. Right now, a couple of years ago, a lot of research has been coming forward. A lot of geoscientists have been extensively working on Ghaggar. There are some studies which do find similar Himalayan settlements in Kutch, which connect Saraswati. That one Saraswati used to flow all the way to near the Dholavira. There are studies which are talking about the various paleo beds of Yamuna and Satluj respectively. Remote sensing data is evident and it's available, which tells us that yes, there was a river, and the river was fed by glacier and two major connectors, that were Satluj and Yamuna. But as research and science goes, with every study, a new layer is discovered, a new facet of the past, and not just the human past, but also the ecological and geographical past is uncovered. And geoscience is taking up and sort of is aiding a lot of understanding of human past in various regions, also, be it prehistory or proto-history. And it's very important to take all sort of work into consideration and not just cherry pick as per your understanding and as per your belief system, and that would be biased, right? So this week's column, I am only discussing one side of the argument, which talks about, and especially the study which was published last month and study which was published in 2017. Two PhD works yielded this study. And the 2017 work, which is Ajit Singh et al. 2017, talks about the migration, the age of the migration of Saraswati, Satluj from Saraswati, which is moving towards westward. So it basically gives you the age of the time, the age of the phenomenon that took place, that disconnected Satluj from the major river. And the work which was published last month talks about when Yamuna stopped being, when Yamuna got disconnected from the Ghaggar, which at one point met near Suratgarh, which is just west from Kalibangan. It met there at one point of time, and it was gives the age of when that disconnection took place. So these two papers which I talk about in my essay, you can read it. The link will be in the description box below. These two studies talk about this age and how the analysis was undertaken and how the samples were taken and the samples were dated. Now the one which is with Satluj, in regards to Satluj, talks about that the Satluj moved westward about 8,000 years ago. And which is even more interesting and caught my eye was a date from Yamuna, which was about 10,000 years before even Satluj, 18,000 years ago. So the study is telling us, and we'll talk about its archaeological implications, of course, but right now the study, the geological analysis that was undertaken by the scientists tells us that Yamuna, which connected Ghaggar near Suratgarh, got disconnected, moved eastwards, and about 18,000 years, and then it gradually kept moving eastward to where it is at the moment, right? So Yamuna is, there are 4 paleo channels to Yamuna, which were already been discovered through remote sensing. Yashpal et al. Have extensively worked in this region, and they have given us a clear-cut idea as to where the paleo channels of Yamuna were and how it has migrated. And so therefore the researchers, the scientists, they have taken 47 samples, 6 cores, 47 samples from the paleo bed, which was identified by Yashpal and his team. And they did OSL dating of these samples, which gave them the age of 18,000 years ago, that the Yamuna started migrating and moving eastward. And similarly, Satluj started moving westward about 8,000 years ago. Now, 18,000 BC, if you look at the human past now. We have talked about the rivers and when the age that we have got, the recent date, and let's talk about the human past. And I'm not talking about any interpretation or any other a textual interpretation. I'm just talking what archaeology is. Archaeology has told us, and what archaeology tells us. About 18,000 BCE is the time before even Holocene. Holocene is the time when Ice Age ascended. In layman's term, it is the time when rivers started to form. It became fishing became part of the economy, and this pushed, and this was a beginning which led to the onset of agriculture eventually. So Yamuna supposed to have disconnected before even Holocene, right? And Satluj got disconnected about 8,000 BC, 8,000 years ago, which is about 4,000, about 2,000 years even before the early Harappan settlement in that region. So one can understand that the chronology is both, be it the Yamuna or be it the Satluj, they both are telling us that just before early Harappan, started, or even 2,000 years before that. After that, when the mature Harappan period began in that region, both the rivers, the most major glacial-fed rivers which had connected Yamuna at one point in time, got disconnected. That's all the study is telling us about. That's all the scientists are telling us. But as an archaeologist and as a student of archaeology, it is important that we take these studies into consideration and not just disregard them because it doesn't serve our purpose. That's not what I was taught. And as a student, it's our job to raise question. So I am raising question, if this is true, if about 8,000 years ago, 8,000 BP, when Satluj moved westward, and 18,000 years ago when Yamuna moved eastward, this gives us the timeline of just few years of, just when early Harappan culture, or you have the sites like Birana started to come up. And then after that, about 2600 BC, you have mature Harappan urbanization. Was the river culture, which is that, that Harappan civilization, or the core of the Harappan civilization is on the rivers which was fed by glacier. Does this break this particular thought or not? Of course, we do have many Harappan sites which are on seasonal rivers. We have many Chalcolithic sites which are on seasonal rivers. But the factor responsible for urbanization is always considered to be the river, and the factor which for the decline of the civilization is always considered to be river. So it is imperative, it's important to us that if river is considered to be an important factor in the rise and the decline of urban culture, then if the river was seasonal at the time of mature Harappan a period, it was not a glacier fed river, it was not a perennial river, but already a non-perennial river. What are the archaeological implications? There was another study which was conducted by Geosan, which spoke about fluvial landscape. Now that particular study, which was undertaken in 2012, it basically tells us that during, there was already aridity which intensified about 5,000 BP, which is about 2000 BCE, and that monsoon was actually an important factor for the rise of the urbanization and its decline, and not that the river was a glacier fed river. The study is clear cut, telling us about how the fluvial landscape of the Harappan civilization was, and how monsoon, more than the river, it is the monsoon or monsoonal cycle, and the changes in the monsoonal cycle really affected the rise of urbanization and decline of agriculture and cities as well. And I think a lot of archaeologists do believe that monsoon did play an important role in the rise and fall of civilization and culture. Indian summer monsoon is an important factor to be considered, which is usually not considered. We lay a lot of emphasis on the river and river alone, but we do need to look at various other factors. Now, I'm aware that about in 2019, there was another paper which was published by Chatterjee et al., which spoke about how the Satluj was regenerated and became was perennial river about 9,000 to 4.5 thousand years ago, and that it was a time period which supports the hypothesis of river being glacial fed and rise of urbanization. So that particular paper is supporting that very side of the story, whereas the papers that were published in 2017 and the one which were published in 2024, the ones which I quoted in my essay, are talking otherwise. They're basically trying to tell you that perhaps it's time that we also look beyond just the perennial rivers. We look beyond that and try and understand that if at all the river Saraswati was non-perennial even before the time we have considered, and not cherry picked to fit our understanding. What were the archaeological implication, how the settlements flourished, what was the water management system they have undertaken, was there any other water management system like the ones we see at Dholavira, taken up by the people who live there, or what was the changes in the agriculture practices also. These are important questions to be considered. The reason why I stress on this very topic is because when as students, when we read about the archaeology and the geoarchaeology, the importance of Yamuna is always ignored in the geological history of the river. Not just archaeology. Archaeology is the study of material remains in a simple way. But when you talk about the geological studies, the importance of Yamuna and Yamuna's retraction and Yamuna's movement towards east is often ignored. We give a lot of emphasis on Satluj because a lot of people who do that, they know because Satluj retracted and moved westward much later than Yamuna. So Yamuna apparently is always considered very less important in this entire storyline. So the focus of the scientist was to bring the history, the landscape history of Yamuna into the limelight, and then to try and understand what were the implications of this historical narrative that emerges from the scientific work. That's exactly what the work is trying to say. And as a student of archaeology, I am asking questions that is it that we should be picking up one side of the coin and ignore the other side, or we try and understand exactly what has happened. And even if Saraswati was a non-perennial river, I don't think it degrades its importance in any ways, because you do have large number of settlements on the bank, and even if it was perennial, it's still going to be an important river feeding large number of settlements. What it would change is archaeological investigation and archaeological thought, nothing else. It will not hamper its importance whatsoever. It should not it will it should force archaeologists to rethink about few things, and maybe try and understand that the phenomenon that we are talking about happened at 2000 BCE. Perhaps it was happening maybe earlier as well, and through time a lot of management systems have been put in place, because a lot of archaeology is lost in intangible components of culture, so we don't know a lot of it. But this study, or the study done by Geosan in 2012, which is basically tells us that about how there was aridity that intensified, and that how monsoon is important in pushing urbanization and also causing deurbanization, or be it the study done by Chatterjee in 2019. All of it basically trying to tell us that science is picking up, so does archaeology, and so does our ability to present views, and ability to ask questions. And that's what, as students, I have learned and I've been doing. So at the end of the day, these questions, the questions we ask, we will get answers only when we ask questions and we do research and we go ahead and find evidence to prove or to negate these questions. That's how the research will go on. So in the end, this week's essay is basically has focused on just one part of the story, which is that if at all the studies conducted in 2017 and 19 are to be considered absolute truth, what are the archaeological implications? We do have evidence of fluvial cultures coming up. Do we replicate that in Harappan context, or are we going to always believe or go with the belief system that Harappan, that River Ghaggar was a glacial fed river till 2000 BCE, and only after that it became monsoonal? So what are the evidence, and do we have evidence actually to prove the work done in 2017 or 19, or don't? So that's what this week's column is all about. If you liked it, please subscribe to the Print's column, and do follow Print, and do follow Print on various social media platforms. Subscribe to its YouTube channel, and for more stories, stay tuned. Thank you.